Welcome back to BFR. Again, my own little solo BFR, but, Bernie will get over it. Bernie don't care about these bands anyway, right, Bernie? So last time we did Styx. Now tonight I want to get into another band, possibly one of the first progressive rock American bands, really. Kansas. Strange, right? I know. And not a lot of people remember Kansas for being a heavy hitter in the prog scene at the time. But, while America was not really into this whole prog thing, Europe was killing it. I mean, Yes, and King Crimson, and Jethro Tull. So many bands. Genesis. Europe kind of had a stranglehold on this prog scene. And so what happens, a couple guys get together in Topeka, Kansas, of all places, and they form a progressive rock band. It was born out of a separate band called Kansas, oddly enough, and I think another band called White Clover. Both of those bands had different members, and they kind of got together finally and became the definitive Kansas. A few years of playing around, nothing really happened all that much, I guess. But Kirshner Records signed them to their label in 1973. It took a little while for the album to come out. It finally came out in 74. What a fantastic debut album. Let's just get that out of the way right now. What a crazy, great... I mean, it's produced excellently for, a six-piece rock band from Kansas. We're going to say that a lot because it's a strange thing for these guys wearing overalls and whatnot to be doing this kind of rock music. But man, they had a knack for it. This one here, Can I Tell You opens the album, bringing it back, which I believe is a J.J. Cale cover, maybe about smuggling pot over to Mexican border, something like that. I don't know, I could have made that up. Lonely Wind on here, a Steve Walsh track, is gorgeous. It's a gorgeous ballad. It really showcases Steve's voice and his early songwriting ability. The album gets a little more progressive as it goes with Balexis and Journey from Mary Braun. The B-side you have, probably the best thing on here is Death of Mother Nature Suite. Just a 10-minute miserable, dark-sounding tune. It's is this essential Kansas? I think so. I absolutely think so. Not too many are going to agree with me, but not too many might agree with Kansas at all, because they know like one or two songs, and we'll get to what those two songs are on your greatest hits album. 1975, Song for America. Their sound really came together here. As with the first album, you have some of your shorter songs, just your typical kind of rockers, with your longer, moodier pieces. On this one here, the first side, I mean, geez, down the road it opens up. It's kind of forgettable. I know they still play it, or at least they were still playing it. It's kind of a forgettable track. It's just a rock track. There's not any prog going on there whatsoever. But once you get the Song for America and Lamplight Symphony, Lamplight Symphony may very well be one of the greatest Kansas songs ever. And not a lot of people know it. People do know Song for America, oddly enough. Another, 10-minute crazy slice of progressive rock music. This is what these guys were doing. They didn't really care about, airplay so much because they were just writing all these long, extended pieces. Side 2, Lonely Street, The Devil Game, forgettable. Good songs. Within the scope of the album, they get destroyed by the progressive side of Kansas, which ends here on a 12, 13-minute epic called In Commudro, Hymn to the Ottman. I have no idea what that means. Kerry Livgren has already said that oftentimes he just makes words up because he thinks they sound cool. And I'm perfectly fine with that. Again, is this album essential? For those couple songs I mentioned, yes. Yes, it is. And there's a really cool drum solo in Commudro on the final track on the album that just shows that Phil Ehart is a nut job on the drums. He's insanity on the drums. The production lets it down because his drums unfortunately sound like he's playing them on garbage cans, plastic garbage cans, but otherwise killer. Check it out. It is necessary. Then we get to this. There have been a lot of discussions on Mask online over the years. This was kind of a band in turmoil because their first two albums didn't do very good. I believe they both charted. The first one charted in the top 200. The second actually charted almost in the top 50. This one, again, yeah, it did chart, but it charted even lower than the one before it. This album is just, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it yet. I've been listening to it for 25 years. I still don't really know what to make of it. It Takes a Woman's Love, 2 Cents Worth. Man, it's kind of pop. There's not a whole lot going on here but pop stuff. On the B-side, It's You, pop stuff. Look at the non-pop stuff. Icarus, Born on Wings of Steel, an absolute classic Kansas song, absolute classic. All the World, again, has another little Phil Ehart drum break in there that's pretty friggin' sick. This guy knows how to play drums, there's no question about that. Child of Innocence, Mysteries and Mayhem, and The Pinnacle, all on the B-side of this album. All absolute mandatory early Kansas tracks. They kill. They absolutely kill. Most of them have made it onto greatest hits, although they are not hits by any way whatsoever. They're, originally just kind of deep cut tracks that made it to the radio later on. But this was their second album of 1975. And again, it went nowhere, to the point where the labels, getting ready to drop them. The band knows they're on borrowed time. This ride is almost over. Pack up and get the fuck out of Kansas, right? Do I have to say anything about this other than the fact that my dog got hungry one day and destroyed many of my records? This being one of them, but hey, whatever, the vinyl still sounds great. Left Overture, 1976. I can say one thing about Left Overture, and people who aren't really Kansas fans are going to go, oh, Carry On Wayward Son. What? Yeah, that's probably all I have to say in this entire video, so that all you greatest hits buyers can go out there and at least know one song by one of the most important fucking bands of the 70s. But I digress. After Carry On Wayward Son, The Wall, What's on My Mind, Miracles Out of Nowhere, Opus Insert, Questions of My Childhood, Cheyenne Anthem, and the album's closing track, Magnum Opus, which is a 9-minute romp that with almost no vocals whatsoever except for the intro and outro of the song. It is sickness. Yes, it's progressive rock all over the place, except not too many progressive rock bands had a violin player, especially the caliber of Robbie Steinhardt, who helped write all this stuff, who was just in it up to his friggin' suspenders. You know what I'm saying? It's so tight. It's produced insanely. It's so crisp and beautiful and wonderful. And if you haven't heard this album, if you never heard Carry On Wayward Son on the radio, and you didn't want to check the rest of this out, please do yourself a favor. At least go on streaming. Listen to something like Magnum Opus if you have more of an urge for progressive rock at the time. Go and listen to something like The Wall or What's on My Mind for really well-written rock tracks with some progressive elements in them. This album blew Kansas up. All of a sudden, everybody knows Kansas, and for good reason. And luckily, some of the tracks that came on the albums before started getting their due. People started actually paying attention to this band, and it's a great thing. I mean, by 76, with a band on the verge of breaking up, to hit at this level, it carried them through the rest of the 70s. They probably didn't need any other hits in the 70s. They had one major hit after this, even bigger than this, that everybody knows. It's on the radio 1,500 times a day. You can't escape it still. but it's not a hard rock track, and it sounds nothing like the other things on this on the follow-up album, oddly enough. And we're going to get to the follow-up album, like right now. What is it? No? Alright, well, I got to edit something, but we'll get right back to it. There it is. Point of No Return, 1977. Man, top of the world, ma. This is where this band was so fucking huge. They were just huge. I don't know what to say about that. This album only cemented what they had done on the previous album. It was a mix of hard rocking tunes with little progressive elements here and there. The title track alone, I mean, Point of No Return, if you've never heard it, I'm sorry. Like, seriously, you had to have heard Point of No Return. The big thing on here, which everybody is going to know, and everybody's going to say, oh, that's a great song, I love that song. Dust in the Wind. All of a sudden, a progressive rock band says, let's get rid of the drums, let's get rid of all electric guitars, and we're just going to have an acoustic thing from Kerry Livgren, which I believe was a finger-picking exercise that just turned into a song. And Steve Walsh on vocals, of course. And that's all it is. It's a very simple song. It also made those guys fat on money. It still probably makes them fat on money. That song blew up so hard, and things went wrong after this album, I think. Maybe because of Dust in the Wind. The prog fans might have split because they were looking for the proggier side of Kansas. And the fans that listened to Dust in the Wind went, oh wow, this is really cool. But nothing else sounds like that, and they never really did anything else that sounded kind of really like that. So you had a divided fan base at that point. And Kansas was trying to play to all of it, and really none of it at the same time. But this album it's so mandatory. It redefines mandatoriness. Shut up, I'm by myself again. I say stupid things. Standout cuts in here. Portrait He Knew, amazing rock track. Closet Chronicles about Howard Hughes, another standout cut. Nobody's Home and Hopelessly Human end this thing. They're both just beautiful, beautiful songs. Livgren is writing, at this point, almost everything. And I mean, Livgren has written most of the band's greatest songs in the first place, but here he's really at his peak. He's really at his songwriting peak. It shows. This album is huge for a reason. Go check it out. Now, I don't do live albums. Two for the Show, 78. The band needed a breather. That's usually what most bands do when they need to take some time off. They release a live album so they can get a year or so off, where they can concentrate on writing the follow-up. The follow-up for Kansas was 1979's Monolith. Now, let me talk about Monolith for a second. The art's cool. There's cool art in this. But it's a very different Kansas. It's a very different Kansas. Their sound has become even more polished since the Point of No Return album. On the Other Side opens this thing in badass form. It's a great rock ballad. I say ballad because it is a ballad in a sense, but there's some really cool rock stuff in here, and even a little progressive touch in the middle. But it's just the sound of the band has changed for some reason, not for better or for worse. I mean, I still think this is an essential album. Still the original lineup. Still the Kansas that had written all this crazy cool shit for the last decade. Angels Have Fallen, awesome song. Glimpse of Home, Reason to Be, all amazing songs. None of them very heavy tracks. The heavy tracks, like My Soul Cries Out for You and Stay Out of Trouble, are very forgettable songs. I'm sorry. It's unfortunate. They're forgettable tracks. They're just not very good tunes. Not a lot of radio play on this album. And it was almost the end of the classic lineup and almost the end of what they had built. And it shows. But it's still a great album. The songs that kick are just great tracks. 1980. Audio Visions. which I think, I don't know, am I the only one that thinks this looks like Dennis DeYoung from Styx on the back cover, like jamming out to a Kansas record? That's kind of what I see here. It looks, I don't know, it looks like Dennis. Maybe I'm the only one that thinks so. But 1980, now the band has to change again to fit in with all the incoming bands during that movement. And all the bands from that era were changing their sound. They were trying to mainstream. Kansas is no exception. They did it too. They had to survive, even when record sales were dwindling. They were still looking for hits, as all those bands were. Sometimes they looked in the wrong places. Relentless on here, awesome rock track. Hold On, possibly one of the band's greatest ballads, I think. Even better than Dust in the Wind. It's a great rock ballad. Hands down, awesome song. Curtain of Iron and No One Together, huge standouts on this album. It shows you what Kansas was still capable of. Slightly longer songs, little hints of that progressive rock that they had unfortunately left behind now. But it closes on Backdoor, another great track. But there's nothing here that's going to blow your face off, even though this has become, man, a favorite of mine over the years because of how powerful and how well written some of these tracks are. You can't just let this one go. Audio Vision is still a great album. Unfortunately, right after Audio Visions happened, they went into the studio to record a follow-up in '81. By now, Kerry Livgren's lyrics had gotten a little too religious. And a lot of his previous stuff did have religious connotations. He became a born-again Christian. Dave Hope, the bass player from the band, eventually came along for that ride and also became a born-again Christian. But Steve Walsh wasn't having it. Like, Steve Walsh was tired of it. He just wanted to write rock tracks about rock stuff, whatever that means to you. He wasn't happy with all the religious connotations that were coming up in the music. So he, after recording probably 3/4 of an album with the band, he splits. Forms a band called Streets that had 2 albums out that were nothing but pop rock music. Kind of forgettable. But he's now out, and luckily, because of the internet and the bootleg market and stuff like that, there is an entire CD of the tracks that came from those sessions. And many of them showed up on the follow-up album after he was already gone. Many of those songs showed up, and re-recorded by the new lineup, of course. But, I mean, they were full tracks. They were pretty fleshed out at that point. So they did spend a lot of time with Steve in the studio. But it ended in disaster, obviously. So they hire John Elefante. You could laugh, I did too. And they release Vinyl Confessions in 1982. Again, a different band. Phil Ehart kind of right up here front and center, like I always thought he should be, because Phil Ehart is, or again, should be, one of the top, he should hit every top 5 list of greatest drummers ever, because the man is sick. He's a beast on drums, and why people don't give him more attention is way beyond me. Anyway, 82, this album comes out. Play the Game Tonight, I think, was their opening single, and you can immediately tell, this isn't Steve Walsh, this is John Elefante singing. And while John Elefante has a great voice, I don't know if it ever really gelled in the studio. Even though he was even helping write tracks and whatnot, it got further and further away from that classic sound. But, Chasing Shadows, excellent song. Diamonds and Pearls, excellent song. Borderline, killer track. But it's a very uneven album, and you'll notice that the violin is almost non-existent on here. It's only like thrown in every now and then, just as kind of like a, hey, yeah, we used to be that band with a violin player. And Robbie Steinhardt, I mean, being as phenomenal as he is, he got sick of that shit too. So he's like, Robbie Steinhardt leaves. And they really didn't need him anyway because they weren't utilizing him anymore. They weren't using him to his potential anymore, which really sucks because, man, that was the end of that sound, that violin kind of Kansas. The following year, they do Drastic Measures. The album cover should tell you right now, this is going to be a slab of shit. But it's not. It's quite possibly still my least favorite Kansas album, okay? At this point, even Kerry Livgren is not writing like he used to. John Elefante is starting to write along a lot of these songs by now. And Fight Fire with Fire, I think, was the first single off the album. It's a good tune. It's a good rock tune. But the shift in their sound was striking, and not necessarily in a good way. Everybody's My Friend's a cool song. Mainstream is a great song. Going Through the Motions, another great song, which is exactly what the band was doing at this point. I think that was actually written for that reason in general, that the band was only going through the motions. We have a record contract, we have to sell records, we have to go tour, we have to do, what the rock bands do, but riding out contracts must be a miserable thing for a band to do, and this band was basically fracturing at this point. The end. It's worth it to check out some of the good songs in this album, but it is not mandatory in any way whatsoever. End of story with that. And kind of the end of story for Kansas for a little while, because at this point, they released the Greatest Hits album, which went like 4 times platinum. It was huge. But there's one song on it called Perfect Lover. It was like an original song for just to slap on a Greatest Hits album. Perfect Lover. The only members on Perfect Lover were Phil Ehart and Rich Williams. Again, the only 2 members to be on all Kansas albums. And then John Elefante on vocals with his brother Dino. And I don't know what Dino was doing on the album. He was probably playing guitar or bass or something. I don't know. The track is absolutely awful. It's awful. It's a terrible way for this original run of Kansas to go. The song was shit. I think they released it as a single to try and get some interest. There was absolutely no interest. As a matter of fact, when the Greatest Hits was remastered and re-released in later years, that song was deleted from the album, and it's not on there anymore. So good luck. Go try and find it if you really if you really need to hear it. Go ahead, but don't. Just take my word for it. It's fucking terrible. You don't need it in your life. It's forgettable. It's over. And at that point, so is Kansas. Sorry, folks. 1983. Goodbye, Kansas. But not yet, because something happened in 1985 when things started looking up again. Welcome to 1986, and Kansas is a band. In 1986, they released Power on MCA Records. And it's such a... You'll never know this is Kansas by any means whatsoever. There's still no violin. That's out the window. But you still do have Phil Ehart and Rich Williams, who by now is wearing this cool eye patch. How many bands today have an honest-to-God pirate in their fucking band? Check them out. But anyway, after Steve Walsh's failed other band, who also had somebody called Billy Greer, maybe you'll recognize that name, he brings Billy Greer along, and all of a sudden Kansas gets back together in 1985. They started writing an album together, and this is the album that popped out. And holy shit, is this a different album. You don't expect this at all from Kansas. Is it a solid album? Yes. It absolutely is. Because by now, with a very different landscape and a very different band, Steve Morse, famously of the Dixie Dregs, Steve Morse joined the band on guitar. Oh man, he's doing some really cool shit on this album. Apart from helping write most of these tracks with Steve Walsh at the time, it is a pop rock record. 1986. It's a pop rock record. Don't expect any of what you know Kansas to have been before that. This is a very different band. Silhouettes in Disguise, Power, All I Wanted, We're Not Alone Anymore. Guess what? Every one of those is a great fucking song, man. Taking in the View, Can't Cry Anymore, which had a video that I think was actually deleted and never even aired on MTV or something like that. I mean, maybe the label wasn't willing to take risks on this new Kansas yet. But at the same time, Steve Walsh has never sounded better. His voice is amazing on this. The music, while it's more geared toward that pop-friendly radio at the time, the songs are really well constructed, really well written, and this thing actually charted really well. All of a sudden, this dinosaur rock band, dinosaur rock, this dinosaur band, let's just say that, from the 70s, released an album that people were paying attention to in the mid-'80s, and everybody saw big things for Kansas. Here's where my rant comes in. In the Spirit of Things, 1988. Let me just tell you a couple of songs on here. Ghosts, you know, One Big Sky Inside of Me, you know, Once in a Lifetime's on here. Alright, Counting on Love and Stand Beside Me are also on here. Oh my god, 1988, what did you do? Do you know what they did? They released quite possibly one of the best albums of their fucking career, okay? You never heard of it because there's not one hit on here. They released one single that did absolutely nothing. The album charted at like 120 or something like that. After the success of Power, people thought, holy shit, Kansas was going to do something. It is not Kansas' fault, however, because MCA Records, the assholes they were at the time, dumped this band soon after the album came out. Gave no promotion to it, no music videos. I don't even think they allowed them to tour. And if they did, it was a very small tour. The songwriting is killer. It's the same writing team that was on the previous album. And the album was forgotten. It was put in cutout bins. You can still probably find it for like $2 somewhere. Because this album failed miserably. But it is extremely strong. The songwriting is crazy. I'll tell you why. You look at the end of this album. Rainmaker goes right into Bells of St. James. Jesus, you talk about ending an album in epic form? They're two of the greatest songs this band has ever written, and nobody has heard of them. Simply because they were considered an old band that wouldn't draw crowds anymore, wouldn't push record sales anymore, and the only reason that this didn't push it was because the label said, fuck you. And to them I say, fuck you too, because this album deserves to be up there with some of the greatest things written by Kansas. End of story. 1995 happens. Now, many years go by. Because of the failure of In the Spirit of Things, the band just kind of went in the circuit for a while and said, we're just going to play all of our old shit ad nauseum forever. We're done. We are not an album band anymore. Sorry I had to cut there. I got distracted. But as I was saying, though, Kansas went on a non-stop touring thing for a long time. And in the 90s just got together one day, and by now Steve Morse is gone. Steve Morse went on to Deep Purple. He's still there, so I guess that worked out, right? But in 1995, look at that thing. I remember seeing this and having no idea if it was the same band that I had loved all these years. But 95, wow. I mean, and you know what? Half of this album is exceptionally good. Their sound had changed again. They do have another violin player now in David Ragsdale, who does a spectacular job on here. It's probably more the Kansas sound you would know from earlier years. But it went nowhere. Obviously, it went absolutely nowhere. And by now, Steve Walsh's voice, it's hurting. It's hurting. I know there was some drug use involved and stuff like that. And his voice kind of sucks. But it doesn't suck. He's still better than half of the people singing in the fucking 90s. He still sounds good. But there's a heavier edge to this album simply because of when it came out. And I mean, I Can Fly, Desperate Times, Hope Once Again, sick-ass awesome ballad, Under the Knife, Cold Gray Morning, which was actually written by Kerry Livgren, even though he didn't rejoin the band for this. He, I guess, wrote a song for them or had something left over that he gave them or something like that. And it ends up peaceful and warm, and it's fantastic. And the people really forget this album exists. But it's a great album, even though a lot different than what you're used to. It's an excellent album. A couple of years later, I don't have it on vinyl because I don't think it's actually on vinyl, Always Never the Same was released. Which is most of the original lineup back together. I mean, Robbie Steinhardt came back for the first time in however many years. Robbie Steinhardt's back. He's playing violin. But what the songs are just remakes of a lot of their greatest hits. that they re-recorded with a symphony orchestra, and they sound great. I mean, let's get that straight right now. They sound great. Steve Walsh's voice is holding on. It still sounds pretty good. Everything else is great. The production is great. They threw in a couple new songs and a cover of Eleanor Rigby, and you know what? They're good. Like, they're good, but nobody was paying attention. Nobody was paying attention to Kansas at this point, because the previous album failed miserably. So you knew that anything that was going to come out by Kansas at this point wasn't really going to do all that well. Except, hi there, Somewhere to Elsewhere, 2000. This is the original lineup. This is the full reunion that people were waiting for however the fuck long. This is the reunion album. All the original members on here. They kept Billy Greer along because he'd already been with the band for so long. They just said, yeah, why not? Come on, you could write songs and stuff like that. But now Kerry Livgren's also writing songs again. And it shows. It shows the classic sound is on this record. The classic sound that you all know and love from early Kansas is on this record. Stuff like Icarus 2 is on here. The Coming Dawn. I mean, Jesus, Byzantium. Half of the album is a little uneven, but the songs that really hit are killer tunes, and it just showed that this band was still capable of doing great music if they wanted to do it. I guess they didn't want to do it, because that's the only album from that lineup. It's also the only album the band did for the intervening 14 years. So Goodbye Kansas from then, and Hello Kansas from now. 14 years? And the band decides to get back together. But not that band. On this album, you have some other people on this album. You still have Philly Hart. You still have Rich Williams, obviously. Maybe David Ragsdale's on here. Jeez, I don't even know. This album is still relatively new for me. 20 foot. I mean, are you kidding? Look at this thing. It's huge. It's like a 180-gram beast. It's also a double album, even though it doesn't warrant being a double album, because one side is just etched vinyl. But I mean, it sounds amazing. And yeah, it's still Kansas. No Steve Walsh. Steve Walsh retired. He's out. Forget Steve Walsh now. He's done. They got a dude who sounds kind of just like Steve Walsh. Ronnie something or other. I don't know. I'm really not up on these albums as much as I should be, being the fact that it is the return of Kansas. And guess what? It charted well. People were buying this. People were paying attention to Kansas. It's insane to think that after a 14-year break, this band could come back and have, I think, their highest charting album since maybe 1980 or 82. It's absolutely insane. But the Voyage of 818 on here, it might as well be a classic track from the old days. It's something they had left over or not, but it's not. It's a brand new track. But it touches every little button that you want Kansas to touch, if you want Kansas to touch you in that way. Read into that whatever you will. But this album was a big deal. It was a big deal. And Kansas toured for a little bit more. And now look what I'm going to do right now. And I never do this. I never go on my phone. I never look things up. But with this year being as strange as it is, and having to do a lot of your buying online because you can't go to record stores and shit like that, 4 years after this album, they released The Absence of Presence. I've listened to it several times. I'm not extremely familiar with it the way I would like to be, to really rate it and to really talk about it. It is a solid album. The musicianship is amazing. They followed the previous album up with a similar style, a similar sound. The prog is back with this version of Kansas. The prog is back. Except on this one, if I look at the album thing here on the Wikipedia thing, you ever hear that? The new album hit number 10 on the album charts in America. Number 10. if that says something about the staying power of Kansas, that's great. If it says something about the staying power of classic rock, also great. But regardless, the album was a hit. It was a hit Kansas album 30 years after the last hit Kansas album. And hopefully this lineup will continue on and give us more albums in the future, because they're killing it. They're absolutely nailing it. They're doing everything right. From the album art to the sound of the songs to the violin being a return to the progressive, lengthier tracks. They did it right. They came back and said, we're just going to be the band that we're meant to be. And they're being successful at doing that. That was my list of Kansas albums. It was a little off tonight. I got distracted a few times and stuff's going on. And I'm too stupid to just turn off my phone and shit like that. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was a pretty lengthy retrospective, I think. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you want to go out and maybe check out a few of the tracks that I talked about. Maybe it'll give you a new appreciation for Kansas if you're not already a fan. But I imagine the people watching this are already fans. So for the one or two of you who aren't, hopefully you'll get something out of this and you'll check them out and dive deeper into their catalog. So for this week, that's all I got. I'm Chris, this is BFR, and I'm out. I'll see you next time.